The ink on the divorce papers was freezing before it even hit the page. That is how cold the room felt. But the cold wasn't coming from the open windows or the snow falling outside the Ashford estate. It was coming from the people standing around me. I can still hear the sound that haunted me for years, the sharp, crystal clink of champagne glasses touching as my husband, Arthur, toasted to his freedom. Look at the photo on the screen. Do you see the woman in the gold dress laughing? That is Serena. She is the woman Arthur told me not to worry about. And the man with his hand on her waist. That is Arthur, my husband of 3 years, looking at her like she was the prize he had been waiting for all his life. And then there is me. The woman in the cheap brown coat, hunched over the table, wiping tears from her cheeks. They thought I was crying because I was losing him. They thought I was crying because I was terrified of being poor again. They were wrong. I wasn't crying because I was sad. I was crying because I was holding back a laugh that would have shattered their entire world. You see, none of them knew the truth. Not Arthur, not his cruel mother Beatrice, and certainly not Serena. They thought they were kicking a mechanic's daughter to the curb. They didn't know that exactly 6 hours before this Christmas party began, I had received a phone call that changed the trajectory of my life forever. A call that confirmed the sale of a software patent I had been secretly developing in their attic for 2 years. A sale worth $4.5 billion. If you hate bullies and believe that silence is the loudest form of revenge, you need to lean in for this one. Because what happened after I signed those papers, it wasn't just justice, it was an execution. Let me take you back to the moment it happened. The Christmas Eve gala at the Vane family mansion was designed to intimidate. The ceilings were 20 feet high, draped in velvet and gold. The air smelled of expensive pine, roasted duck, and old money. I walked in wearing the only winter coat I owned, a wool jacket I'd had since college that had frayed at the cuffs. I had spent the last 3 years trying to be the perfect wife for Arthur. I cooked meals they refused to eat, I cleaned rooms they never used, and I tolerated his mother's insults about my blue-collar upbringing with a smile that was slowly killing me. I thought if I just loved him enough, if I made myself small enough to fit into his world, the money wouldn't matter. But the Vane family fortune was a lie, a beautiful, gilded lie. They were drowning in debt. Their shipping empire, Vane Logistics, was crumbling under the weight of archaic management and bad investments. They needed a bailout, and they needed it fast. That bailout had a name, Serena Thorne. Her father was the Vane's biggest creditor, a man who owned half the Port Authority. The deal was simple, unspoken, but understood by everyone in their social circle. Arthur marries Serena, the debts go away, and the Vane legacy survives. I was just the obstacle in the middle, the grease stain they needed to scrub out. Beatrice, my mother-in-law, didn't even let me take my coat off when I arrived. She intercepted me in the foyer, her eyes scanning my outfit with undisguised disgust. She was wearing a blood-red velvet gown and a necklace of diamonds that I knew for a fact was insured for more than my parents' entire house. "You're late," she snapped, her voice low and venomous. "And look at you. You look like you just crawled out from under a car." "I am a mechanic's daughter, Beatrice," I said softly. "I'm not ashamed of it." She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my flesh through the wool of my coat. "Well, tonight you're going to do the one useful thing you're capable of. Come with me." She led me straight to the center table where the lawyers were waiting. The music stopped. It wasn't an accident. Beatrice had signaled the orchestra. 300 guests turned to watch. It was a public humiliation ritual, staged for the benefit of the Thorne family, to prove that Arthur was truly done with his charity case. "Sign them, Clara," Beatrice hissed, sliding the documents across the mahogany table. "Stop embarrassing us. You've leeched off this family long enough. Go back to the garage where you belong." I looked up, scanning the room for the man I had promised to love in sickness and in health. Arthur wouldn't even look at me. He was standing by the fireplace, too busy smiling at Serena. She was whispering something in his ear, her hand resting possessively on his chest. She saw me looking and smirked, then said loud enough for the front row to hear, "Don't worry, Arthur. I'll give her gas money on the way out so she doesn't freeze." My hand shook as I picked up the pen. It wasn't fear shaking my hand. It was adrenaline. I looked at Arthur one last time, desperate for him to show even a flicker of regret. I remembered the nights I stayed up late fixing his mistakes when he tried to manage the company books. The times I comforted him when his father yelled at him. I remembered the Arthur I met 3 years ago, the one who told me he hated his family's pretension, the one who said he loved the smell of motor oil on my hands. That Arthur was dead. The man standing across the room was just a hollow shell filled with his mother's ambition. "I'm sorry it has to be this way, Clara," he said, finally looking at me with eyes devoid of any emotion. "But Serena and we just make sense. We're from the same world. You were an experiment, Clara, a rebellion, but rebellion is over." That was the moment my heart didn't break. It hardened into something unbreakable. Diamond hard. I looked down at the paper. Paragraph 4 stated I would leave with absolutely nothing. No alimony, no settlements, just my personal belongings and the car I came in. They wanted to make sure I left as poor as I arrived. I signed. The scratch of the pen on the paper sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. I signed my name with a flourish I hadn't used in years. Beatrice snatched the papers away instantly, checking the signature as if she expected me to trick her. "Done," she announced to the room, waving the papers like a trophy. Finally. The guests applauded, actually applauded. Men in tuxedos and women in silk clapped their hands as if they had just witnessed a brilliant performance. I stood up, buttoned my cheap coat to the chin, and turned my back on them. As I walked toward the heavy oak doors, I could feel their eyes on me. I could hear the whispers. "Poor thing. She never belonged here. Trash always finds its way to the curb." As the valise opened the massive double doors, the cold wind hit my face, but it didn't bite. It felt like freedom. It felt like the first breath of air after being underwater for 3 years. If your blood is boiling right now at how they treated her, smash that like button. It is about to get so much worse for them. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the karma headed their way. I didn't go to a diner to cry over a cup of cheap coffee. I didn't go back to my parents' old house to beg for a bed. I walked past the line of Bentleys and Rolls Royces to the end of the driveway where a black, tinted SUV was idling in the shadows. The driver, a massive man named Elias who used to be Special Forces, stepped out and opened the door for me. "Good evening, Ms. Vance," he said, using my maiden name. Or rather, my professional name. "We have the team waiting at the hotel." I slid into the warm leather interior. On the seat next to me was a tablet and a glass of sparkling water. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I had saved earlier that day. "Execute the purchase," I said into the receiver. "Buy it all." The voice on the other end was my new attorney, Marcus Thorne. No relation to Serena. Marcus was the kind of lawyer other lawyers had nightmares about. He was a shark who ate families like the Vanes for breakfast and picked his teeth with their subpoenas. "Consider it done, Ms. Vance," he replied, the smile audible in his voice. "The transfers are clearing as we speak. You now own the debt, all of it." Let me explain what the Vanes missed while they were too busy mocking my clothes. For 3 years, while they thought I was just reading paperback novels in the attic or hiding from their parties, I was working. I was coding. My father had taught me how to fix engines, but I had taught myself how to fix systems. I realized early on that Vane Logistics was failing because their routing was inefficient. They were bleeding millions in fuel costs and wasted time. So I built a solution. I built a proprietary artificial intelligence logistics engine I called Vance Logic. I worked on it every night while Arthur was out drinking with his rich friends. I worked on it while Beatrice was screaming at the maids. I poured every ounce of my frustration and intelligence into that code. 6 months ago, I started pitching it under a pseudonym, CM Vance. I took meetings on Zoom with my camera off, using a voice modulator. I became a ghost in the machine. And that morning, just 6 hours before the divorce, a little company called Google finalized the acquisition. They didn't just buy the software, they bought the exclusive rights. $4.5 billion. The money had hit my offshore account while I was putting on my brown coat. I wasn't just rich. I was wealthy enough to buy their entire neighborhood and turn it into a parking lot. But I didn't want the neighborhood. I wanted something more personal, Because the Vane Shipping Company was publicly traded and failing, their debt was being shopped around by the banks. They were high-risk loans. Nobody wanted them, except me. I spent the next week in the presidential suite of the Four Seasons, undergoing a transformation. I didn't just change my clothes, I changed my skin. I hired a team of stylists, image consultants, and personal shoppers. I cut my hair into a sharp, angular bob that framed my face like a weapon. I traded my wool coat for tailored Italian silk, cashmere, and structured blazers that cost more than Arthur's annual salary. I sat in boardrooms with bankers who had no idea I was the same woman who used to change oil filters in a garage. I spoke their language. I moved my money with the precision of a general moving troops. I dismantled the Vane family's safety net piece by piece, and they didn't even feel it happening. New Year's Eve arrived, 7 days after the divorce. The Vanes were throwing another party, an even bigger one this time. It was the merger gala. They were celebrating the engagement of Arthur and Serena, and more importantly, the injection of capital from Serena's father that was supposed to save the company. They thought their financial problems were over. They were popping champagne, laughing, celebrating the future. At 11:00 p.m., the snow was falling again. I told Elias to drive up to the front gate. The security guard, a man named Jenkins who had watched me leave in tears a week ago, stepped out of his booth to wave us away. "Private event," he said, shining his flashlight into the back window. "No entry without an invite." I rolled down the window. Jenkins froze. He looked at me, then at the car, then back at me. "MS, Mrs. Vane," he stammered. "It's Ms. Vance, Jenkins," I said, handing him a black envelope embossed with gold. "And I believe the owners of the property are always invited." He didn't understand, but the authority in my voice made him open the gate. We rolled up the long, winding driveway. The mansion was lit up like a beacon. I could hear the music thumping from inside. I walked up the front steps, my heels clicking on the stone with a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. Marcus walked beside me, carrying a leather briefcase. The double doors swung open. The ballroom was packed. They were in the middle of a toast. Arthur was holding a microphone, his arm around Serena's waist. She was wearing white, looking like the cat who had eaten the canary and then bought the birdcage. "To the future," Arthur shouted, "to the Vanethorn legacy." The crowd cheered, and then I stepped into the light. The silence that fell over the room was different this time. It wasn't the silence of awkwardness or pity. It was the silence of shock, of confusion. I was wearing a midnight blue gown that hugged every curve, draped in diamonds that were real, not insured rentals. I stood tall, my chin high, radiating a power that sucked the air out of the room. "Clara," Arthur stammered into the microphone, the feedback whining. "What? What are you doing here? Security." Beatrice marched forward from the crowd, her face turning a violent shade of purple. She looked like she was about to have a stroke. "You have some nerve returning here," she shrieked. "You signed the papers. You are nobody. Get out before I have you arrested for trespassing." I didn't yell, I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I simply walked to the center of the room, the crowd parting for me like the Red Sea. I signaled to Marcus. "Actually, Beatrice," I said, my voice projecting clearly without a microphone, "I'm not trespassing. It's impossible to trespass on property you own." Beatrice laughed, a nervous, shrill sound that echoed off the high ceilings. "You've lost your mind." The stress must have broken her poor, simple brain. She thinks she owns the mansion. Marcus stepped forward. He didn't say a word. He simply connected his tablet to the room's main AV system. The giant screen behind the Christmas tree, which had been displaying photos of Arthur and Serena, flickered and changed. A document appeared. It was a deed of ownership, a foreclosure notice. "As of this morning," Marcus announced, his voice booming through the speakers, "the primary holder of the Vane shipping debt has changed. The bank sold the defaulted loans to a private holding company, Vance Global." "Vance," Arthur whispered, lowering the microphone. "That's me," I said, stepping closer to him. "Clara Miller Vance." The room erupted in whispers. I could hear the confusion rippling through the crowd. She bought the debt. Vance Global, the company that just sold to Google. That's his wife. Arthur looked at the screen, then at me, then at his mother. His face drained of color, leaving him looking like a ghost. You bought our debt, he asked, his voice shaking. With what money? You're a mechanic's daughter. You don't have $10, let alone 10 million. I smiled, a cold, sharp smile. I'm the creator of the Vance logic algorithm, Arthur. Remember the little computer project you told me was a waste of time? The one you laughed at when you saw me coding in the attic. You said I should focus on laundry. Well, Google didn't think it was a waste of time. They paid $4.5 billion for it. I let the number hang in the air. 4.5 billion. You could practically hear the greed activating in every person in the room. Beatrice's eyes went wide. Serena took a step back from Arthur. I took another step toward Beatrice. And since you missed 3 months of mortgage payments on this estate to fund your lavish parties and your son's gambling habits, I bought that note too. I own the roof over your head, Beatrice. I own the chair you're standing next to. I own the champagne in your glass. I turned to the crowd, addressing the 300 stunned socialites. This party is over. You are all trespassing on private property. Serena, realizing the ship was sinking faster than the Titanic, pulled her hand away from Arthur as if he were on fire. She looked at her father, the creditor. Her father was staring at his phone, reading the news about Vance Global. He looked up and shook his head at her. Wait, Serena stammered. If they don't own the company, if they're bankrupt, then this marriage is pointless. My father won't merge with a corpse. Arthur turned to her, panic in his eyes. Serena, baby, wait. We can fight this. It's just a misunderstanding. Serena laughed, and it was colder than anything Beatrice had ever done. It's not a misunderstanding, Arthur. You're broke, and you're an idiot. You left a billionaire genius for this. She took the massive engagement ring off her finger, dropped it into Arthur's half-empty champagne glass, and turned on her heel. I'm leaving. Daddy, get the car. Serena walked out, and the rest of the guests followed. Nobody wanted to be associated with the Vanes anymore. They scrambled for the exits like rats fleeing a sinking ship. Within 5 minutes, the ballroom was empty. Just me, Marcus, Elias, and the Vane family. Beatrice collapsed onto a sofa, sobbing into her hands. Not because she was sorry, but because she had lost. Arthur stood in the middle of the room, looking broken. He looked at the ring in the glass, then he looked at me. He started to walk toward me. I saw him put on that charm, that fake warmth he used to use on me when he wanted something. Clara, please, he begged, reaching out a hand. We can fix this. I didn't know. I was pressured by Mother. You know how she is. She forced me to sign those papers. I never stopped loving you. I was trying to save the family. He stopped in front of me, tears welling in his eyes. Real tears this time. Tears of a man who realized he had thrown away a diamond to pick up a rock. We can start over, he whispered. You and me, with your money and my connections, we could rule this city. I looked at his hand, the hand that had signed me away 7 days ago, the hand that had held Serena's waist. I looked him dead in the eye. You didn't love me, Arthur. You didn't even know me. You loved that I was manageable. You loved that I was small. You loved that I fixed your cars and balanced your checkbook and never asked for anything in return. But I'm not manageable anymore, and I'm certainly not small. I signaled to Elias. I'm your landlord, Arthur, and rent is due. What? He gasped. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises, I said calmly. If you are not gone by midnight tomorrow, I will have the sheriff remove you physically. And regarding the company debt, I plan to liquidate. Vane Shipping is being dissolved. I'm selling the ships for scrap and the warehouses for land value. The name Vane will cease to exist in the business world. Beatrice looked up, her mascara running down her face. You can't do this. We are the Vanes. We are institution. You were an institution, I corrected. Now you're a cautionary tale. I turned around and began to walk toward the door. The sound of my heels on the marble was the only sound in the massive, empty house. Clara, Arthur screamed after me. Clara, wait. Where am I supposed to go? I have nothing. I stopped at the door. I didn't turn around. I just spoke over my shoulder. I hear the garage is hearing, Arthur. You always said I belonged there. Maybe you'll have better luck than I did. I walked out into the snow. The air was crisp and clean. The black SUV was waiting. I climbed in, and as we drove away, I didn't look back at the mansion. I didn't look back at the life I had lost. I looked forward. I had entered that marriage seeking love, and I had left it with a lesson. They thought they could break me because I came from nothing. They forgot that when you come from nothing, you know how to survive anything. They built their house on a foundation of money and arrogance. I built mine on iron and code. And that is how I went from the rejected wife crying in the corner to the owner of the very table they forced me to sign on. They wanted a transaction. They got one. If this story gave you chills, hit that like button right now. Subscribe and turn on all notifications because I have more powerful revenge stories coming your way that will restore your faith in karma. Comment below. Did I let them off too easy, or was taking everything exactly what they deserved? I read every single comment. Thanks for watching, and remember, the best revenge isn't just success, it's ownership.